Paul says we're not saved by works of the law. Now, works of the law in traditional Christianity is typically the same thing as under the law. In other words, traditional Christianity interprets the phrase works of the law in Paul as works done in obedience to the law. In other words, the works are being described by traditional Christianity, and supposedly by Paul, are the Sabbath keeping, the dietary keeping, the dietary issues of Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, the keeping of kosher, in a word. The keeping of the festivals are interpreted by traditional Christianity as works of the law. The festivals are interpreted as keeping of the works of the law. So all of these things, these works, so to say, are works of the law according to traditional Christianity. And again, we're going to have to work from context. Context is king. Context is king. We must always rely on context. So here we go. Question. Paul says we're not saved by works of the law. Please explain. Answer. This will easily be the longest answer of the set because it will develop one of the core hermeneutic keys to historically understanding Paul's letters. Works of the law, quote unquote, which the Greek is ergonomou, is one of the most challenging statements of Paul when read outside of the context of Paul's first century Jewish worldview. On the one hand, mere mechanical law-keeping will never save anyone, nor will sincere law-keeping for that matter. The Torah was not given of God to provide salvation of the soul. However, it is a wonderful sanctification tool when used by the Holy Spirit, and it is a tool used to highlight and convict both regenerate and unregenerate men of sin. So on the theological level, it is true that keeping the law does not save us. In fact, keeping the Torah has never saved anyone. However, the standard Christian theological discussions on law versus grace, quote unquote, often fail to grasp Paul's 2,000-year-old historical and sociological discussions about group membership and what this meant to many first-century Jews. In Paul's day, Israel sincerely, albeit incorrectly, believed that group affiliation is what mattered most in terms of corporate salvation, both in this life and in the life to come after one died. Belonging to, that is, getting in and staying in, the family clan of Israel was the most important detail an individual person could focus on. Jews, both then and now, referred to the social policies that govern Jewish life as halakha, which is a Hebrew word referring to, quote unquote, the way in which to individually or corporately walk out Torah in a practical manner, end quote. The Torah has built-in God-given halakha, but most often it was the additional responsibility of Jewish leaders to determine specific group policy, etc., where the Torah was silent in some manners. In their segregated way of thinking, all of covenant Israel was comprised of Jewish people only, viz., everyone in Israel was a Jew. If a non-Jew wanted to attain corporate salvation, both now and after they died, that person needed to legally convert to become a Jew first, and thus join Jewish Israel. Once they were legally recognized as Jewish, their place in the physical covenant was ostensibly maintained by keeping the Torah. This group membership imposed Torah observance concept is coined covenantal nomism. Thus, Paul's term works of the law is actually a sociological and technical phrase used to describe the historic Jewish-only policy that forbade Gentiles from joining Israel without going through a man-made conversion policy to become a Jew. In short, this was an ancient way of referring to Jewish identity leading to covenant faithfulness. For Jews in the first century, God was offering a simple package deal equation, which was Jewish Israel plus Torah keeping equals corporate salvation, both in this life and in the life to come. Obviously, by now, most Christians understand that this historic, theological, Jewish-only policy is at odds with the genuine gospel of God through his chosen Messiah, Yeshua, a gospel taught from Genesis to Revelation. Using this more historically accurate way of interpreting Paul's writings in the New Testament, we understand Paul to be opposing this first century inaccurate theological policy by saying to both Jews and Gentiles, quote, "No one gets into Israel, that is saved. No one is saved merely by being or becoming Jewish, and then stays in Israel by keeping Torah," end quote. How do we know this to be the proper interpretation of Paul's writings? If we study the New Testament as an historical document alongside the other extant writings that have survived from the first century Judaisms, i.e. the rabbinic commentaries, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Sifrei, things like that. If we study our New Testament alongside these other ancient Jewish documents in context, as well as corroborate the theology of the Old Testament in proper context, which would include Torah obedience, then we begin to get a more accurate picture of the pattern of theology of the first century Jewish people, and what we discover is that the Jewish concept of individual/group salvation cannot be easily caricatured by simplistic merit theology, the way historic Christianity has traditionally characterized Jewish devotion to Torah.